JC Tretter, the union president, appearing on Ross Tucker's podcast, was asked about the situation with running backs not getting paid. Now, Tretter's in a tough spot because he represents all players. And there is an element of robbing Peter to pay Paul when you get in a salary capped environment. The more that one person makes is the less that another person will make. And so if you're arguing in support of running backs to try to get more money, well, you're taking money away from guys who play these other positions because there's only so many dollars available for everyone. That's why there should be separate bargaining units, frankly. Now, that would diminish the NFLPA. It would fracture into a bunch of different unions, but maybe that's what needs to happen. And that would be far better than what Tretter recommended. Tretter said, and I agree with his first quote, and what I'm probably going to do is share with you some of the things he said and then offer my commentary before I continue. His first line, and this is from the story that MDS posted yesterday, you need to try to create as much leverage as you possibly can. Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. The problem is there's only so many ways you can do it. And that's what Tretter goes on to acknowledge. Here's his next quote. That's the tough thing with the franchise tag or being restricted in movement, is it decreases your leverage, but then you have to find creative ways to build leverage elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to pause there. The reason the franchise tag is in place is because the players agreed to it. The restrictions in movement are agreed to by the players. The rookie wage scale was agreed to by the players. The players agreed in 2011 to extend from 2 years to 3 years, the minimum time period before a draft pick could sign a second contract. You know, Adrian Peterson got his deal with the Vikings, I think 2 years after. Maybe he didn't. Maybe they rode that out. They shouldn't have. He should have been clamoring for more. But under the old regime, 2 years was enough to get paid. Now, 3 years is the minimum. And I made the argument yesterday on PFT that running back should take a page from what Ezekiel Elliott did in 2019, hold out after 3 years, insist on your contract after 3 years, but get your money after 3 years when that window opens. Okay, back to what Tretter said. I think we've seen issues. Now, I don't think anybody would say they were fake injuries, but we've seen players who didn't want to be where they currently are have injuries that made them unable to practice and play. But you're not able to get fined and you're not able to get punished for not reporting. So there are issues like that. I don't think I'm allowed to ever recommend that, at least publicly. Good boy. But I think each player needs to find a way to build up leverage to try to get a fair deal. And that's really what all these guys are looking for, is to be compensated fairly. Okay, now look. He's saying the quiet part out loud. For years, before the term hold-in became something that refers to the player who shows up unhappy with his contract, negotiates with the team, but doesn't practice until the negotiations have concluded. Hold-in is now used in a way that is acceptable. We've seen it with TJ Watt, where it works out well. We've seen it in other situations like Roquan Smith last year, where you negotiate, you get to a point where you can't get a deal done, and at some point the team says, okay, it's time to practice. It's time to play. We've reached the end of the line here. And obviously the Bears later traded Smith to the Ravens, where he got the long-term contract he was trying to get. Hold-in used to mean guy who has an air quotes injury, guy who would play if he had his financial security, but he's not playing. He's not taking the risk. He's not assuming the possibility that something happens that keeps him from getting paid, or he's just generally not happy. And this is his way of making a statement. Sorry, I have a hamstring injury. My hamstring is tight. Oh, you don't feel the tightness? I do. I can't play. I know of players who, at the recommendation of their agents, have done that. Goes back to the story Chris Sims tells about Brandon Marshall in the last year of his contract with the Broncos, getting toward the end of the season, very stressed out. How do I go out and play knowing that I'm putting at risk the financial security of my family because I don't have my second contract? And hey, you know, I tried to always cut through the noise on the Lamar Jackson situation from last year. There was a question of whether or not he could or couldn't play with that PCL injury that he had. And I thought it was as simple as he could have played and he would have if he had his financial security. And I had no problem with it. You want this guy, I'm having a microphone, I'm sorry. You had this guy in the last of his rookie deal with the Baltimore Ravens with no security beyond 2022, and he has a knee injury, and maybe he could put a brace on it and go play, as Mike Vick said, put a brace on it and go play. But you're risking further injury. And you're risking getting to the point where the Ravens wouldn't use the franchise tag and no one else would want you. And maybe you have to sign a 1-year prove-it deal somewhere before you can get the contract you deserve. It's not worth it. Was Lamar Jackson holding in the old school sense? Maybe he was, and I have no problem with it if he was. Now, I don't advocate doing it across the board. I don't think it's something that, number one, JC Tretter should be talking about. And for running backs particularly, I'd say be careful what you wish for, because the fundamental problem is supply outweighs demand. They can find somebody else. They can basically throw a rock and hit another running back who can come in and do the job at almost the same level as the guy who's not playing. So if you are a running back who's trying to get paid and you decide you're not going to practice or play, they put the next man in, next man up, he does well, okay, we're fine. We're fine without you. And it actually makes it easier for the team to make the transition because the new player has built up name recognition and equity with the fans. That's one of the big problems that teams face. And this is one of the reasons I think teams gravitated away from a workhorse system to 2 and 3 running backs, like the Saints did under Sean Payton. There was a time when it was Deuce McAllister, Reggie Bush, and Pierre Thomas. And even now, Sean Payton likes to have a stable of running backs. And I think the unspoken part of that is if you have that workhorse running back who is gaining a bunch of yards, scoring a bunch of touchdowns, selling a bunch of jerseys, generating a lot of attention, you got a fan base that doesn't want that player to go. I think that's why back in 2005, after Shaun Alexander became the league MVP and the Seahawks probably would have preferred to just say, we'll start over. They had to pay him. And what'd they do 1 year later? Ripped up the contract and moved on. So the system is conducive to draft, play, move on, like the Cowboys did with DeMarco Murray and like they would have done with Ezekiel Elliott if he hadn't held out after his 3rd season. I think if Elliott hadn't held out after his 3rd season, they would have ridden out the 5 years of the rookie deal with the 5th-year option for a first-round pick, tagged him once, and then said, see you later. And instead, he got 7 years and about $70 million. He would have gotten 6 years and less than $70 million, obviously, and the Cowboys would have moved on last year. So my point is this, if there is a point here somewhere, and I think there is, you better be careful when you decide to activate the hold-in if you are a running back and you're trying to create leverage, because it may not create the leverage you're looking for. Now, what it could do, if you're Saquon Barkley and he's making noise about sitting out the whole season, if you're going to sit out the whole season, get your $10.1 million, be part of the Giants, and just be injured. I got a hamstring injury. I twisted my ankle. I got some other soft tissue injury. I got a calf problem. That's kind of what Tretter is advocating. And see, the problem is because of the stupid rule that prevents long-term deals after the middle of July, it's not like the Giants can say, okay, fine. Can we stop the charade here? We'll give you your long-term contract. They can't give him anything at that point. All they could do is say, all right, we'll promise not to tag you next year. Will you now show up and play and practice? But again, there's an element of it that is understandable because the player has no security beyond this year, typically when you have the old school hold-in. There is a point, though, where it crosses the line. And that's why Tretter's comments concerned me. Because I can get behind it in certain specific circumstances. I don't like it as a blanket approach. The blue flu. Some way to get your money, not get fined, but withhold services and force the team to eventually suspend you for conduct detrimental to the team. That's what would happen. And then you have a big mess. You have a big distraction. You have a TO situation from 2005. Remember that? When he wanted to be traded so badly, he just decided to be as disruptive as he possibly could in the hopes that the Eagles would throw their hands in the air and trade him. They ended up dealing with it for a full year and then cut him after the season, after they suspended him 4 games for conduct detrimental to the team without pay, and then sent him home with pay. It's one of the things that you can't do anymore. It was baked into the 2006 CBA because of what the Eagles did with Terrell Owens, where they basically said, we'll pay you to get the hell out of here. So, look, tread lightly, running backs, if you're thinking about faking an injury, because you're going to give the team a chance to show the fans that the team will be fine without you. You better have a good reason for it. You better use it strategically. Don't just use it as a way to create leverage, especially when there's no leverage to be created. For these franchise-tagged running backs, there's nothing they're going to get in exchange for whatever leverage they exert. What are you getting? You can't get a long-term deal. So I was just surprised. I was surprised that Tretter was that candid, and I was surprised that he would create this impression that it was a smart thing to do whenever you're just trying to create leverage. It's not. And it's the quiet thing that he never should have said out loud. I think it's unbecoming to his position for him to say what he said. We all know, those of us that follow the sport closely know that it's something that can happen from time to time. I just don't think it's something that ever should be uttered publicly, and it's not something that should be done on a regular basis. There are specific situations where it makes sense, but they are the exception, not the rule. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.